Hello and welcome back to another episode of Vikings Happy Hour. Tonight, we have Eric Eager, the VP of Research and Development for SumerSports, joining us to talk about the Vikings and Giants playoff game last week and then what to just expect this offseason for the Vikings. So grab your Lake Monster beer and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Vikings Happy Hour, where we mix our favorite beverage and talk of your Minnesota Vikings. SKOL!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Vikings Happy Hour. Like I mentioned in the intro, Eric Eager is joining us this evening. And by the way, this episode and all Viking Happy Hour episodes are sponsored by Lake Monster Brewing and That's Badass Wood Art. You can go and get your custom piece of That's Badass Wood Art and use promo code CT Pocket for 20% off any one order. We got some fun stuff to talk about this week now that the Vikings are booted from the playoffs, which I did feel like was inevitable, right? I think we almost saved ourselves a little bit of embarrassment not having to go play the 49ers, because I think they would have just ripped us apart. But we have Eric on. Eric, your takes on the Vikings are, I'd say pretty spot on for the most part. Some fans may disagree, but for the most part they are. So what were your takeaways from Sunday? Whether it's Kirk related, Kevin O'Connell related, the defense related, anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's emblematic of a lot of what we've seen the last few years where, the quarterback played pretty well. He was certainly not the reason they lost by any stretch. But the roster, and we've had, seasons with this team where the roster kind of popped up a little bit and half seasons in the case of this team. But there's just so many holes on this roster, and this team depended so much on things that were so unsustainable that it just was eventually going to crumble a little bit. And one of the stats that came out, my former intern Arjun Menon, who was looking at basically perfectly covered plays, which this idea is like, how often do none of your players make a mistake on defense? Pretty predictive of success in coverage. And the Vikings were the worst team in the NFL this week in that less than a quarter of their passing plays on defense were such that no defender made a mistake. So you look at a season where you have great individual efforts by Patrick Peterson, Harrison Smith remaining who he was, good year from Eric Kendricks, even like pop-ups, type seasons from Duke Shelley, even a certain amount. But ultimately the weak links for the Vikings were their downfall. And, that circles all the way back to the decision they made in 2018, where they put a lot of money into the quarterback and hoped that the rest of the roster could hold on, even as they were not able to shove chips into the table on other positions. And, the quarterback has played very well. And but the rest of the rosters continue to atrophy. And we saw that Sunday against frankly, the worst playoff team besides the Vikings and the Giants.
Has your opinion changed on Kirk Cousins? Or is it still about the same?
Yeah, I mean, 2021, this summer, I ranked him as the 8th best quarterback in football. Like, I don't think that really has changed much. I think that, this year, even though his statistics weren't as good, he only averaged, I think, 7.1 yards per pass attempt. The EPA was kind of middle of the pack. He had 23 turnover-worthy plays in the regular season, which was a top 5 mark in football. I actually found him more enjoyable to watch this year than in previous years. I remember texting somebody, texting somebody in the Vikings front office. I was like, look, I find it kind of cool that you guys are running every route on third down past the sticks, because that makes Kurt have to throw it, because I think Kirk if you give him the check down, he's like Ron Burgundy. If you give him the teleprompter, he's going to read it. And, we saw that on the fourth down play. I thought that Kirk took more chances. I thought that he took more hits. I thought that he, was more of a leader this year in a lot of ways. And so even though statistically it wasn't as pristine as it had been in the past, I felt like he was a more endearing quarterback this year. So this is weird, but
I
I
agree.
enjoyed watching him more than the previous 4 years. But I ultimately, the fact that he's unable to elevate the roster past the deficiencies that his contract helps produce, is always going to be the reason that they fall short most seasons.
Well, and to your point that you made, like, I mean, in a sense, this year he kind of did, right? He came up with many game-winning drives, right, that covered up the deficiencies and allowed us to win. But again, at the end of the day, at the end of the season, the boogeyman's still going to come out at some point, right? It came out against the Cowboys, came out against the Packers, a little bit against the Lions, I guess, to a certain extent, right? Like the boogeyman came. It's just, we were able to overcome that, and he was able to elevate the team enough, mostly him, right, with his play, but it was never going to be enough once we get to those elite teams. And that's where I'm worried about next year.
Right. And the bar was lower, right? And I think, when we looked at the difference in general managers this year, so adofo-mensah, went one way. He basically, pushed back contracts on great players and, and Kirk too. And, whereas Ryan Poles basically traded Robert Quinn, he traded Roquan Smith. He basically got rid of, traded Khalil Mack, and, left the cupboard bare. The Bears looked at the easy NFC, and make no mistake, the Vikings were not a great team this year. They had a negative point differential, and when you look at who they've beaten, let me quickly look at off the top of my head with these backup quarterbacks that were on their ledger here. You're looking at Andy Dalton, who ended up being their starter, but let's overlook that. Andy Dalton was a backup. Skylar Thompson was a backup. Taylor Heineke was a backup that they played. Mike White was a backup that was on their schedule. Matt Ryan wasn't a backup, but he had been benched already before. And then in Chicago, you played, Nathan Peterman. You also got like the worst performances of the season. One of the worst performances out of the season in week one out of Aaron Rodgers. You got a bad performance out of Josh Allen against Buffalo. So like Kirk did, overcome a lot of the deficiencies of the team, but it wasn't as though they were facing like the world beaters. And I think that was part of the thesis, with, adofo-mensah when he was, deciding whether or not, what to do with this team this year. He was saying, look, like, this is a very winnable season. And, whether or not it's fair, he's going to be judged by this season plus other seasons. Whereas you look at Poles, he's basically got one shot to build a roster. It's just this year they have $100 million. They have the number one pick. And if they go busto on this year's, collection of players, like Ryan Poles is basically a sitting duck. Kwesi this year did not have a great draft by any stretch of the imagination. Their free agent acquisitions were just whatever. But this 13-win season is going to buy him, I think, some time. I think that the hardest part for them is going to be now. How hard is it to go to your boss and say, look, the team I built you that won 13 games isn't actually as good as that, so I need to start over. That's a really hard conversation to have.
Yeah, well, the other thing too that at least I'm generally concerned about is you're now playing, the first place opponents next year and not, the last or the third place opponents. I forget the divisions that we face, but you're just going to get the best of the best teams next year. And I think we have the AFC West. So we got the Chiefs coming to town, the Chargers. There's just going to be a lot of more difficult games, I would anticipate next year. And I don't think this team at the current moment is going to get anywhere close to the 13 wins that they got this season.
I mean, and on top of that, Matt, I mean, you also have the best teams in the NFC, the Eagles, the
Right.
Niners, right? And I
Yep.
forget who our division that we play is, but for sure the Chiefs and the Niners, or Chiefs, Niners, and the Eagles. I mean, those teams aren't going to need to be purging their roster for cap space. They're not going to be having to let go of, half of their starting defense this year and letting them walk because we need the cap space and we have to rebuild around that. They're not dealing with that. So,
Yeah.
and why aren't they dealing with that outside of Patrick Mahomes? Rookie contract QBs.
Yeah.
Well, so
Right.
someone brought up in the chat, what happens now? Because JJ's up for an extension, right? And his contract is going to be insane. So what do the Vikings do then in that sense with, a $30 million wide receiver, a 30 plus million quarterback, and a defense that has a bunch of aging veterans and looks incredibly slow all over the field?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote this for Purple Insider with Matt Collar. It's sad. It's hard to say. Like, I said this on, to plug my own podcast, the SumerSports show with myself and Thomas Dimitrov. We were talking today about Jalen Hurts, and it's hard because sometimes great football decisions or great football outcomes yield difficult football decisions. So, I don't think any of us expected Harrison Smith to be this good this late in his career, but the fact that he has yielded hard decisions about what to do. I was on the old 1500 saying they should trade Harrison Smith. I said that pre-pandemic they should trade Harrison Smith, not because he sucks, far from it, but because he's worth something to the team, right? He's worth something to the rest of the league. And instead, of course, Harrison Smith keeps playing great and they keep having to kick the can down the road on his contract. Well, the problem is when you have a year like this year where Harrison's good, not amazing. Well, now you got a good player on amazing money with an amazing commitment. That's the other part. The commitment to Thielen, the commitment to Harrison Smith, the commitment to Cousins are, they're prohibitive to team building. And that is in large part because the guys that you've signed and the guys you've drafted have worked out. It's just that the having to continue to buy into them, foregoing the difficult decisions to move on from players a year early as opposed to a year late, is leading to the fact that now you look at the secondary and there's no good young players in the secondary. You can call Lewis Cine a good young player, but that would be a complete projection. Bynum's an okay player. The cornerback position, we don't know when Andrew Booth will ever play. Caleb Evan looks okay, but there's all questions in a secondary where you need 5 guys to step up and play. Linebacker, Kendricks has been a great Viking, but until they decide to move on from him, he's going to make it hard for them to be younger at that position. Asamoah, at least, was probably the best of a bad draft class this year so far, has been okay. And then on the defensive line, I know they've tried with guys like Wanham and Jones and stuff to bring up the young players, but it's been the success of Donnell Hunter that's going to cause them to make a tough decision on him this year. So it's just hard because the NFL, especially when you have a quarterback like Cousins, the NFL is won and lost by having deep rosters. And, the fact that they have a bunch of great players, plus a quarterback who's good, not great, yields, the holes that a team like the New York Giants helped exploit on Sunday.
So I guess my question to you then, Eric, is I do like the point that you bring up about the draft class and just them just being projections. I think Kwesi even alluded to that today. I think someone said, how can you look forward when you don't know really what you have? And he goes, you can't really count on that. Any added benefit we get from that is great, but we don't know who Lewis Cine is going to be. We don't really know who Andrew Booth is going to be, but you've been around football a lot longer than we have, and you've obviously your show is with a former GM. So how would you attack this offseason if you were the Vikings? Yeah, I'll just leave it as broad as that.
You have to be. I think you have to be really sober about what this represents, right? So on offensive line, you have to hope that Garrett Bradbury will give you will negotiate with you in a modest contract, that he shows some good faith, because they stuck with him for longer than they probably should have. You have to hope that Ed Ingram emerges. Now, guard is one of those positions. I mean, we learned it with Garrett Bradbury in Minnesota. That takes a long time to evolve, right? Ezra Cleveland's still on a rookie deal. You have great tackles. So I think the offensive line is probably okay if you can get Bradbury, but you probably have to sign some depth pieces. We saw late in the season that things fell apart when guys got injured. So, what does that mean? The thing that I wrote about in Collar's piece was, there are two types of positions in football. There are premium positions and there are non-premium positions. The premium positions you can almost only access through trades and and the draft. So like tackle. Well, the Vikings have done great there. Darashaw and O'Neal. They're probably going to be fine there. Cornerback, they've tried, and I give Kwesi a lot of credit for trying there with Booth and Caleb Evans. And prior to that, Spielman, surely did try with Mike Hughes and Mackenzie Alexander and that kind of thing. Defensive end, outside linebacker, edge players, another one. They're okay there. They need some reinforcements, of course, and they have never spent more than a third-round pick on an edge, Spielman era or adofo-mensah era. And then quarterback and wide receiver. And, Jefferson was a really good pick in 2020. But other than that, they really haven't spent top draft capital on wide receiver in Minnesota before. And the problem is their roster has been so top heavy money wise that they've had to use what usually you can spend free agency money on, non-premium positions, right? So Bradbury, Asamoah, Lewis Seen at safety, like they're spending draft capital on non-premium positions when you can access those guys through free agency. Marcus Williams is a free agent last year. Joe Tooney was a free agent when the Chiefs really needed a guard after their disaster Super Bowl. So I think what you need to do if you're the Vikings is you need to say, look, like we're in such a difficult position from a cap standpoint that we have to reset this year and start to build the roster from the premium positions in. And start with the fact that you got two good ones in O'Neal and Darashaw. You've drafted some in corner. You probably still need some more. You probably need a defensive end high. And with only 4 draft picks in this draft, the only way you can do that is to trade the quarterback or trade Justin Jefferson. And I don't know because, you can make a case that he's the best player in the NFL. I don't know if anybody's ready to have that conversation, nor should they be. But you really do need to start thinking about if you're going to build this roster the right way, you probably have to make some tough decisions on existing players and sort of view 2023 as an actual rebuilding season.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like there's going to be a lot of tough decisions at some of these aging positions. What is your take on like dead money, right? Like, so we have a lot of money tied up, as you mentioned, in aging stars, or they're not really stars anymore, right? A lot of commentary coming from the Thielen family right now on this may be over, but you look at it, it's a $19 million cap hit for 2023. I can't remember. I think it was like 11 million in dead cap or something like that. And then we can save like 6.5. It's something like that. Not really a tradable asset, right? He didn't really show enough this year, whether that was because he was not given opportunities or because he just wasn't creating opportunities, but we didn't see enough for him to be able to warrant any sort of trade. So the only options we really have with him is cutting, or we have is asking him for a restructure, not a kick the can down the road restructure, but like, hey, you didn't produce, we need to look at a pay cut, right? And he's going to tell us, based on what they're telling us on social media, they're going to tell us to go fly a kite. Exactly. So you have Thielen, right? You have Kendricks, who, again, he played okay this year, but you can definitely tell that he was a step slower. And he's the easiest to cut, right? I mean, I think it's like a 1.5 dead, and you save $9 million, right? You look at Harrison Smith, you look at Za'Darius Smith, you look at Danielle Hunter. You had mentioned, what do we do with him? Can't really cut him. You'd have to do a post June 1st trade, otherwise we lose money by just even trading him. So it's kind of a weird situation with a lot of these aging vets, is I guess what I'm trying to say. So Dalvin Cook is another really big one. So how do you view that? Like, do you say, hey, this is a rebuild year, we're going to take this dead money on and get rid of these guys and open up the cap space and try to make maybe some like savvy moves like we did with like Linval Joseph back in the day, and kind of find those second or third tier free agents that can be building blocks for the future. How would you approach that?
Yeah, so I mean, you have 52 players under contract, which isn't so bad, but you're over the cap by about 24.5 million. The Zadarius Smith gets you about 13.5 even pre-June 1. Eric Kendrick gets you about 9.5 pre-June 1. Jordan Hicks gives you another 5 pre-June 1. Now the issue is when you cut these guys, like you have to replace them with somebody, and that gets back to the whole rebuilding thing where you just you do draft picks and stuff. The problem also is they only have 4 draft picks. So that, there's a difficulty there, but just to get under the cap. And remember, the thing that Jason Fitzgerald said, which I thought was so eloquent, was like, when you do restructures, it does there's no edge in being cap compliant, and restructures just mean that you have to play the guy's going to be on your team then, right? And you have to decide whether or not that's worthwhile. And I think for the case of Thielen, for example, it's not. And that's why you have to move on. I don't know if a trade is ever going to work just because his number is so high for what he's producing. But you can go, so Kendricks, Hicks, so you're at 14 with Zadarius, that's another 13.5. So that'll get you under the cap, no matter, nothing having to do with Cousins, nothing having to do with Thielen, nothing having to do with Harrison Smith. You could, extend Danielle Hunter, to get that number smoothed out a little bit. His cap number is actually not that big next year. It's only 13 million. It's pretty small as edge players go, but it's the way the thing is structured. So you probably have to restructure that deal and just commit to Danielle Hunter being a Viking forever, which, given how well he played in the second half of this season and how healthy he was, is not actually a bad thing. Then you can go and say, post June 1, I think you can post June 1, take 13.5 million with savings and 6.5 dead on Thielen. Now the post June 1 issue is, of course, you spread that out over 2 years. So you're going to pay that money, but you're going to pay it over 2 years. And then Harrison Smith, if you post June 1 him, you get 15 more. So that's going to give you 28 million to work with. I think then you just use that to get a Justin Jefferson contract extension signed, which is not going to eat up all 28 of that. It'll be more than that APY, but it'll be, smoothed out over 4 or 5 years.
And quick question on that, Eric. Yeah. Quick question on that. Sorry to interrupt you. So with him still having 2 years left on his contract, right? His 4th year and then his 5th year option that we can pick up. Would that extension then kick in year 6?
You would have new money though. Yes. So usually what ends up happening is a player on a rookie deal will sign a deal, and he'll still have rookie deal money over the final 2 years of the deal. You will have to pay the signing bonus part of it, I believe, over those first 2 years. So it's
just not the salary.
You kind of split the difference over those two. Like especially cash expenditures, which are not actually cap expenditures, which are underrated parts of it. Teams oftentimes will be under the cap, but because, like, for example, if you convert a base salary to a signing bonus and spread that out over 5 years, your cap hit is 1/5 of what your cash charge is going to be that year, or the amount of money you have to put in escrow to pay the player. So there are considerations there, but yeah, Jefferson's still going to be inexpensive for the next 2 years ish. It's going to be an increase, but you're going to be committed to him down the line. So there is a way out, but and then you probably do want to consider TJ Hawkinson on an extension. I know he's 5th year option next year. That would be another one where I don't know you can necessarily bring his number down, because his 5th year option isn't that much money relative to what he could earn, because I think he's a top 10, top 5 tight end in the league. But you do those two things. Dalvin Cook as well, which gives you 11 million if you wait till post June 1. So you end up okay there, but this year's roster is going to be pretty bad if you do all that kind of stuff. And
I think, honestly, I think that's the way you got to go, though. Like, I mean, you can try to run it back, but like, to your point, we don't have the resources to retool enough to cover the deficiencies that we had with each of these guys getting a year older. And now, of course, yes, Scene could take a huge step and get really good really quick and make a big difference in replacing Bynum, and Booth could suddenly become amazing, and Caleb Evans could be great. But like, the likelihood of all that happening is just not very likely. So I think, Kwesi's got some really tough decisions to make on this current roster, what we do with it, how you handle this approach. Again, the good thing, Eric, and I know you've been advocating for this for a bit, is that we could go ahead and, again, extend Hawkinson, backload that, right? Backload Jefferson a bit. And by the time that those things actually kick into being high money issues, Cousins is gone. Now you're on a rookie, hopefully a rookie contract or a much lesser contract at a quarterback position. And then you run, and then you try to run and build quick.
Yeah, the one thing I do worry about with Jefferson is sort of, the player, so this offseason, the players moved a little bit more than you would expect. So Adams, and now granted, Adams and Hill were both on their second contract, so they had already made their money. But Adams and Hill moved to destinations they preferred, right? And Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, guys like that stayed. And the DK Metcalf one, I think, is the one that should give Vikings fans hope, because going into the year, you're talking about Geno Smith and Drew Lock, so there wasn't much at the QB position to really be excited about, and he stayed in Seattle for a top end deal. That's good. That's good for the Vikings, because I think if you're Jefferson, you say, okay, Kirk has made Jefferson incredibly productive, but really hasn't won them anything. So on one hand, you keep Kirk around. What is the incentive for him to want to stay? He could go and play for a team that has a more dynamic quarterback, a quarterback he gets along with. But I don't, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to, I don't have any inside information there. But he could be like, I don't want to play with Kirk if I'm going to sign a long-term deal. But at the other hand, you could say, well, don't worry, we're going to trade Kirk and we're going to draft one of the top-end QBs. And then if you're Jefferson, you're like, do I really want to break in a young QB, right? So it is really tough. Like, I do think there's a non-zero chance that Jefferson, and the Vikings, it isn't as easy as we all think, like, oh, they're starting contract negotiations and he's going to be a Viking forever. The way it happened in Kansas City was the Chiefs sat down with Mahomes and said, you're a Chief forever. Let's work on the details. And they said, if you're going to hold out, and it was after a Super Bowl, so it was a little bit different. But, I think the Vikings and Jefferson will end up agreeing on something. But if you spell it out, there is a path to which he's unhappy and engineers a move. I don't think it'll happen, but I think that there's a non-zero chance that it could.
And so that actually, I kind of want to pursue this path a little bit. So we talked about how they only have 4 draft picks in the upcoming draft. And I know some Viking fans don't want to talk about this, but there is going to be a life after Kirk Cousins, whether that's this next year, which it sounded like Kwesi and O'Connell were kind of committing to Cousins for this next season. But in the next 2-3 years, life after Cousins is a real thing. Do you use your draft pick this year to find that replacement for Kirk Cousins? In which case, now you're down to 3 draft picks essentially to try and fill your roster.
The problem is all the things we just talked about are going to require a lot of draft picks to get out in place. And when you look at 2024, the Vikings have almost $100 million in cap space. Now they only have 27 players on the roster, and that includes Thielen, Smith, Cook, Hunter, all the
in
guys
2024.
Yeah, so it's more like 2000. It's more like 22 players on a contract and about $100 million in cap space. So, part of me thinks that the way out of this is to just play Cousins this year, let the thing breathe out a little bit. Cousins is going to be 35 next year. He showed some signs of age this year. I talked about how I thought he was gutsy this year, but I didn't think his arm strength was great. I didn't think his mobility has ever been that good. To extend him would mean to buy into years 36, 37, 38 on him. And I just don't know. I mean, we saw Matt Ryan. Joe Flacco was 34 when he played with the Broncos, and we've seen how much he's atrophied since then. Probably the best path forward would be to play Cousins this year, trade back in the draft. So take your pick, move back, probably, and Kwesi showed proclivity for this, move back into the 40s or something, get 2 picks in the second round for your first round pick, move back, try to collect 6 or 7 draft picks, know that a blue chipper isn't coming out of any of those picks unless you hit on one, sign bottom of the basement free agents, And if Cousins can win with that bad of a roster, then you do want to extend him. That's like the whole point. But in all likelihood, he can't. And then you just let him walk. You take the 12.5 million void year tax the following year, and you could sign another quarterback, or you can just draft one. I think that the quarterback comes actually in 2024, more instead of 2023.
Well, and I think it's going to be a lot easier for us to get one of those quarterbacks in 2024. We've kind of talked about this earlier, Matt. You and I did around the fact that we have a tough schedule next year, right? I mean, like there's a very good chance we go from a 13-win team to like a 6-win team, 7-win team, maybe 5-win team. Who knows, right? Depending on how bad this defense actually ends up getting with us moving on from maybe some of these guys. So, and you look at the 2024 class. I mean, you have Caleb Williams, reigning Heisman winner. You have Drake May from North Carolina. If he plays well again this year, he's going to probably come out. You got Deion Sanders' kid, who's apparently making some waves. I mean, there's a lot of potential, I should say, coming up in this draft. So, and then with us maybe being a top 10 pick instead of 23, and we want to get to 1, we want to get to 2, 3, 4. It's going to be a heck of a lot easier, right? And we'll have more draft capital at that point in time, what have you. So, this is an interesting comment. Somebody's saying, why don't we go and get Trey Lance? Which, again, that's a projection. But, maybe
well, the problem with that is, and here's an illustrative example. So back in 2020, when New England drafted Mac Jones, they also had Cam Newton, and they were both basically making the same amount of money. The reason that they cut Cam Newton and went with Mac Jones is both directions. If Cam Newton did great, he would get to go right back to the counter and say, I want a $30 million deal. If he did poorly, then obviously that's the other side. The hard part about veterans is that the risk is two-sided. If the guy does amazingly, then you have to pay him. If the guy does horribly, then the guy does horribly. That's the risk in and of itself. And so if you go to a guy like Trey Lance or Jordan Love or somebody like that, the hard part is when they're done with their rookie deal, the risk cuts both ways. If Trey Lance came here and slayed, then you would have to, and did so with great support, then you're right back to possibly the Kirk Cousins deal, where you're paying him too much money and, he's a kind of a, top 12-ish quarterback instead of a top 5, and you're right back to where you started. So that's really the benefit of the rookie deal, guys, is that if he does amazingly, he can't ask for more money for 2 more years. And so you can plan around that with that fixed cost. Whereas when Cousins blew up in Washington, the worst part about it is he blew up on his last year of the deal. So then the Washington Commanders were like, well, what the hell do we do? We have to plan around it. And Kirk's, rightfully asking for more money. And that it was that, and then, they were sort of stuck in mud for 2 years. You want the rookie deal guy, all else being equal, because the variance is higher and you always want to bet on variance for quarterbacks, but then the variance in cost is almost zero, knowing because he has on a rookie deal that you have that fixed number.
That makes kind of sense. I mean, you're using a lot of big, fancy analytical words that I'm not quite sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And then another comment here. So if we were to take that path in 24, you don't necessarily have to start a rookie quarterback. There's free agents that you can go pick up that, you're going to want a veteran guy, a legitimate veteran guy at the backup, or maybe even to take the lead for the first couple of games. A lot of these teams are doing that a lot lately. And there's going to be guys with quality experience who are maybe aging or who are maybe looking for a chance, I don't want to say it because I'll get made fun of, but like a Baker Mayfield or a Sam Darnold type, right? Where again, you don't really want them to probably start a lot of games for you, but at least to kind of hold the candle until that rookie is quite ready, right? That's an approach that you could take as well, instead of just starting a rookie from day one, because you saw what that did with Zach Wilson.
Yeah, exactly. Or and that was always the thing in Kansas City. Alex Smith was a very good quarterback that, played that part. Now, I don't know if Kirk would be that guy if you were to push the clock forward 1 year and and draft one this year. That could be the case. But for the most part, throwing the guy in early is preferable. But yeah, as you said, Ryan, Zach Wilson, the example of when you throw him in before he's ready, how it can hurt his development.
Yeah, and I think,
You should
honestly
not
too, the
extend
way
Cousins anymore. Like honestly, the only and I'm okay. Like I'm not okay with it, but like there are two options with Cousins, three options. Play him out this year, trade him and get 17.5 million in cap space and just say forget this year, or give him a 5-year extension. Like the problem with Cousins' deals have always been not only are they guaranteed, but they are short. The long-term deals that you have at quarterback where you can spread out the risk. Like Derek Carr is about as good as Kirk Cousins. And the only reason the Raiders were eventually okay was because his deal went from top of the market to middle of the market because the cap goes up and his number stays flat. Whereas Cousins' deals, he's always going back to the table 2 years in and bumping right back up to the top of the market. And without knowing, again, it's all about fixed cost. Without knowing what Kirk's cost is in 2024, you can't make great moves in 2023. And so if you knew, like, again, if you guys are committed to Cousins, and I know the three of us I know where we stand, but if the Vikings are committed to Cousins, you give them a deal for 5 years and just say, look, you're our quarterback, and we're going to work around that truth. And at least that stays relatively fixed. And if you have to, move money around 1 year and whatever to build a better roster, perfectly. But the fact that his deals were 3 years and not like 5 or 6, and then the extension was 3, and then this one was 2 plus a void, they have always been, prohibitive because you don't have the fixed cost. You kind of always knew Kirk would be there, but you didn't know what the price was. It was like a adjustable rate mortgage type thing.
Before you went on that, I was going to say I think Atlanta did a really good job bringing in a gap, like a bridge quarterback in Marcus Mariota to kind of see then what Desmond Ridder had. And towards the end of the season, I thought Desmond Ridder looked, fine, and it's promising to build on. So I do agree that that's probably a good option for the Vikings in the future. Before we kind of wrap here, I want to get your take on just Kevin O'Connell as a whole for this season. There were moments where he kind of got too cute, I would say. One showed up perfectly in this wild card matchup with the Jefferson pass that went nowhere. And then there were just some other moments throughout the season. But as a whole, what did you think of Kevin O'Connell? Do you think the Vikings are, still set up for success with him at the helm? Yeah.
I'm a fan. I think, for one, they brought over whatever secret sauce the Rams had as far as injury prevention. I know at the end of the year, it kind of got away from them, but you look at like Football Outsiders adjusted games lost, you look at Whale from PFF, and like the Rams had always been good at avoiding injuries, and that's how their stars and scrubs approach worked. And it was how it was working for the Vikings until, some of their older guys got weaker and they got injured a little bit more. But like he brought that over, and given how the Zimmer and Spielman era ended, that was a plus in and of itself. I also thought he managed the clock a lot better than his predecessor did in Zimmer. I don't think he's a great play caller relative to like Gary Kubiak or somebody like that, but he also did force Cousins out of his comfort zone. And, you saw early in the year, Cousins struggled with, basically them asking him to be more, to kind of nut up a little bit more at quarterback. And at the end of the year, like I said, I actually really enjoyed watching Cousins play this year at the end. I thought, he really did play quarterback until the dump off at the end, of course. I thought he played quarterback like a franchise quarterback would. That was O'Connell, in my opinion. So I like him. I don't think he's perfect. I wish, they could have been more impressive down the stretch, so I could have won some of my Coach of the Year bets on him. But I thought he was a positive. I thought, the end of game stuff, I think we attribute a little bit too much of that to him when it's really variance. But I felt like the team rallied around the quarterback. I think the contrast between how he oriented himself around Cousins and how his predecessor Mike Zimmer did I thought that was palpable, and I thought that the team rallied around Kirk in ways they didn't a season ago. I thought he set that tone. So yeah, I thought he had a great first year. I don't know if that means he's going to be a great coach in years 2 and beyond, but he was I thought he did great this year.
Well, and part of it too is just the culture aspect. And I know a lot of people make this culture thing into too big of a deal, but you can tell that that team was having fun this year. I mean, obviously they're winning, so winning's fun. But when you create a culture of, I mean, it could go two ways, right? It could go both ways, I should say, in terms of like if you're a little too loosey goosey, then people are going to not be held accountable and play poorly. But allowing these players to kind of play themselves, and be themselves, really creates this culture that really, I think, resonated well, not just within the team, but within the fan base, within the community, and all of that. So
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
for sure.
And I think it was fun to watch the Vikings this year, which I think had not been true for a while, right? Like when you guys make content about the team, and I, of course, make content about the whole league, and I've been very critical of the team in the past, and even though I don't, I could still be critical of them. I felt like O'Connell created a situation where Vikings games were enjoyable again, so that was fun.
Yeah, yeah. It was a fantastic year, but now moving forward, this show is going to be very off-season draft oriented because that's just kind of where we are now. Unfortunately, we're sitting on our couches, much like the rest of the NFC North. So, Eric, I want to thank you for hopping on tonight. That's all I had in the agenda. So, if you want to plug your new adventure at SumerSports, go ahead, and then give us an early NFC North favorite for next season.
we already
Man,
know
I
who
already know
he's
who
gonna
you're
pick.
picking. I know.
You guys already know my answer. By the way, can we pause? I don't think I've ever been, and when my wife and I got married, we decided to be Kansas City Chiefs fans. I think that was the best football pick we've ever made in my life. But besides that, I don't think I've ever been more right about a team that everybody else hated than Detroit. So that was a lot of fun to see them come back. Obviously, I wish they would have made the playoffs just to see them. I think they would have gotten killed by the Niners, much like most teams would have gotten killed by the Niners last week. But that was fun. Yeah, so at SumerSports, so I left PFF in late August, early September. 7 years there was a lot of fun. SumerSports, we were collecting a lot of great sports analytics talent. Our CEO, Thomas Dimitroff, is fantastic, former general manager of the Falcons. He and I host a podcast called the SumerSports Show. The owner of SumerSports, the founder, is Paul Tudor Jones, who, if you look him up, is one of the most successful macro traders in the world. So we're trying to apply some of those principles to football. It's been a whirlwind and it's been a lot of fun. And my relationship with football has been a lot more healthy, which has been great. And maybe that's maybe attributed to the fact the Vikings were enjoyable to watch this year as well. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm glad you guys had me on. It's always fun to come back to your content roots. This is one of my first places where I used to do a podcast. So I really enjoyed just hanging out with you guys today.
Yeah, we always love having you on. Oddly enough, it's only been your second appearance. But yeah, like Ryan said, you are always welcome on the show. And we'll probably
I did have one more question quick, actually. Just a quick question. It doesn't have to be a long answer here. Gut feeling, or is Ed Donatel gone? I know it hasn't been announced yet, and
I think he's going to retire. I think that's probably the right move. I don't think firing him is really, like the Vikings are so weird. They won 13 games. Like you think about that, it's only 3 times in franchise history or 4 times. I can remember the years that they were really, really good in the 70s. It was only a 14-game season. So they haven't won 13 or more games that many times. And so firing a defensive coordinator after that feels weird, doesn't it? Right. So, and I think a lot of people look at the talent and know that it wasn't all his fault. But yeah, I don't think he's the defensive coordinator next year. And I think that they have to look elsewhere. And that, by the way, if we're thinking about, you look at the comments and it was really fun to read all those, you're looking at ways out of this quandary that they're in roster wise. Hiring a really superstar defensive coordinator might be one of the ways out of that dearth of talent type thing.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, thank you again, Eric. Ryan, thanks for hopping on as usual. For everyone in the chat, thank you for joining us tonight. The comments were great all night long. Remember again, That's Badass Wood Art. You can head over to that'sbadasswoodart.com and get your custom piece of art from Luis using the promo code CT Pocket for 20% off. And then if you're in the cities, head over to Lake Monster Brewing. They have a bunch of great craft brews ready for you to drink up. So with that being said, Dave, are you behind the camera? What's in store for the rest of the week here?
What's in store should be, I believe it's just going to be myself and Darren and 2 bloggers on Saturday at 2 o'clock Central, so we can have it done before the game start. And we're going to be talking through the transition from the season into the off season. Darren is having a rough time with it, and I'm sort of forced into it because I got to make graphics for everything. So it's we'll help fans deal with how do you go from such an entertaining season to now off season mode. But the first thing will be to watch the playoffs.
Very good. Well, until next week, guys. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings!
So like.
Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and feel free to rate us on your favorite aggregator. A big shout out goes to our partners, the Daily Norseman, where the best Vikings content can be found. To That's Badass Wood Art, when you're looking for something unique to brighten your space. And to Lake Monster Brewing, home of the best beer in Minnesota. SKOL, everybody!